welcome to our next segment. In this segment, we're going to be looking at 19th century art, in particular English Romanticism and also some American art as well. We have looked at Romanticism, in particular French Romanticism, and just to kind of give you a background and review on that, remember Romanticism was characterized by this revolutionary spirit of casting off oppressors and installing ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And this really created a dynamic for freedom, not just in France, but throughout Europe and in North and South America as well. However, the French Revolution itself, even though well-intentioned, did devolve into the chaos of the Reign of Terror and eventually the Napoleonic Wars, and we did see some portraits of Napoleon done by some neoclassical painters. Nonetheless, the philosophical powers that were unleashed by these revolutionary impulses had long-term positive effects on European life, which are embodied in the Romantic spirit. This is a painting we're going to be looking at. It's entitled The Slave Ship. The original title was Slavers Throwing Overboard the Dead and Dying as a Typhoon is Coming On. It is painted by the British artist J.M.W. Turner, and it was first exhibited in 1840. And this really is a classic example of romantic maritime painting. Maritime is a word used to associate with sailing and the sea and nautical themes. Turner depicts a ship visible in the background sailing through a tumultuous sea of churning water. And you also see these sort of scattered human forms floating in its wake. Turner was inspired to paint the slave ship in 1840 after reading the history and abolition of the slave trade by Thomas Clarkson. In 1781, the captain of a slave ship called Zong, Z-O-N-G, had ordered 133 slaves to be thrown overboard so that insurance payments could be collected. This event probably inspired Turner to create his landscape and to choose to coincide its exhibition with the meeting of the British Anti-Slavery Society. Although slavery had been outlawed in the British Empire since 1833, Turner and many other abolitionists believed that slavery should be outlawed around the world. Turner thus exhibited his painting during the anti-slavery conference, intending for Prince Albert, who was speaking at the event, to see it and be moved to increase British anti-slavery efforts. Also placed next to the painting were lines from Turner's own untitled poem that he wrote in 1812. I'm not going to read it. I'll let you go and look at that on your own when you go back and review this PowerPoint later. So the first impressions that I think you might get when we look at this painting is that, the use of color is very important. And Turner creates this sort of enormous deep red sunset over a stormy sea, which is an indication of an approaching typhoon. Upon closer inspection, one can discern a ship sailing off into the distance. So initially, I think when you look at this, it also might come across as a little bit abstract. And then as you look closer, you kind of see these details of the ship. You also see the bodies in the foreground of some of these slaves that have been thrown overboard. Also, you can see sea monsters and other scary things that are probably eating or attacking these poor slaves that have been thrown overboard. And, there is this really cool juxtaposition of these colors. You have this sort of red color with this sort of sickly copper color of the sea. It really is a powerful painting. You can also see seagulls sort of circling overhead. But it is very characteristic in terms of Romanticism, in terms of the brushwork or the painting technique, which is very loose and very expressive. When Turner began painting, he started off painting these sort of bucolic landscapes with very smooth details, or very, more of a neoclassical approach in his painting technique. And his style, and this is one of those earlier paintings, And his style gradually became more abstract as he attempted to make color alone inspire feelings. So here's the painting that we're looking at, and I think you can really see a big difference between the two. Consistent with Turner's emphasis on color in many of his other works, the painting's central focus is on the interactions of various colors. Again, there are very few defined brushstrokes that appear in the painting, and objects, colors, and figures become very indistinct. Rather, objects are defined by their colors in the painting, and some objects, like the bodies of the slaves and the incoming storm, have no real border at all, being solely defined by the contrast with the pigments around them. The most prominent colors are the red of the sunset, which encroaches into the water and ship as well, and the maroon bodies of the slaves as well. And we see that sort of their hands sort of flailing, coming out of the water. So again, color, I think, is something that Turner really pushed with his technique, and really almost in an abstract way. He really wanted this idea of color almost to be like a subject itself in the painting. Turner's emphasis on color rather than design is typical of many Romantic works of the time. The indistinct shapes and the pervasiveness of the sunset's blood-red color serve to convey a focus on nature and illustrate the idea that nature is superior to man. So this is another theme that we're going to be looking at, especially when we start looking at landscape paintings, in particular American landscape paintings as well. This sort of juxtaposition of nature and then sort of conquering nature. And we've seen that in earlier periods that we've looked at too. Other colors in the painting, such as the cool blue of the ocean and the black capes or caps of the water, bring the ocean's hues to life and give the viewer a sense of true emotions of the natural world. The fact that the figures in the painting are depicted as minuscule, and even the ship is sort of off into the background in favor of the water and sun, further serves to decrease the emphasis on humanity and transfer it to this bigger idea of nature. So by placing the emphasis on nature rather than on figures or objects, Turner evokes the concept of the sublime, okay, S-U-B-L-I-M-E, which was a term coined by Edmund Burke. The idea of the sublime is one of the utter powerlessness and terror of humanity in the face of nature. By dramatizing the strength of the waves and the sun, Turner uses the slave ship to perfectly encapsulate Burke's definition of the term. Turner's decision to paint the work with a series of quick, frenzied brushstrokes rather than carefully defined lines adds to the intensity of the painting, serving to make the viewer feel more overwhelmed. Though the painting size is relatively small compared to many Romantic landscapes painting, it still captivates the viewer, arguably in a more powerful way. And I really do think it's this use of color and also this sort of abstraction technique that he's using as well. Some viewers have argued that the slave ship actually represents Turner's reaction to the Industrial Revolution. Remember, that was causing a lot of progress, but it also created, urbanization, overcrowded cities, these cities that had poor, masses of poor, and so it really did sort of really change the idea of